I'm going to go back in now and start to pull out, well, I'm going to do some glazing of some more darker tones. Let's see, what am I using? I've got Prussian green here and the mahogany, mixing those and just glazing that stuff in the upper parts of my tree. Now I'm going to switch over to a smaller brush, using that same mixture of color that I just did, and begin to pull out textural details in the body of my tree trunk. Again, I'm letting the textural stuff that's already in here, in my dried initial layers of glaze, lead the way with how I choose to paint these textures. I'm not forcing anything to exist where it doesn't already have the hint or shadow of it present. I'm also going to take a white gel pen, and what I have here is a Uniball Signo. To pull out some extra bright bits of highlights along the edges of my tree. Since it's a little bit backlit, just by virtue of the fact that I did my negative space with white, this helps to accentuate that. I use two different gel pens. There's this one that I've got right now, and I also like using this one. It's also Uniball Signo. This one is the Angelic. This other one over here is slightly more opaque, so I'll use this one. I'll use this second one over here in my left hand when I want really bright whites, or I'm going to be filling in larger areas. And I'll use this one that I'm using, that you see me doing right now, when I want more delicate and not so in-your-face bright of my whites. So I can use it to sort of blend into the surrounding colors and tones a little bit. You can see it's not quite fully opaque, so it's not super bright. Also, my washes are a little bit wet still. I guess it's not washes, I guess it's just the textural stuff that I just did with my little brush, and so areas that are adjacent to where I'm using this white gel pen like that are sort of eating up the color, the white. So again, it blends in a little bit better. It's not quite so bright. Sometimes to make it even more blended in, I'll swipe across this afterwards with a wet brush, or even a brush with some little bit of color tint to it. Because this white gel pen is not waterproof, which I like actually, because that lets me blend it and treat it a little bit like white gouache. Alright, this tree is starting to take more solid form now. When I work with a planned subject matter, I do tend to reserve my whites much more and paint in a much more traditional watercolor fashion, although not even 100% then. But when I'm doing this sort of on the fly painting where I base my subject matter on the textures the textures and marks that I've made, I do tend to go a lot more back and forth with the white overlays and interspersing that with my watercolor. Just because I'm more concerned with getting a really interesting base texture than in sticking to any sort of traditional watercolor values of not using opaques. The next thing I'm going to do is start to do little darker hints of foliage more defined in the upper areas. And all I'm doing for that, I have my small brush, once again, my size 0. And by the way, before anyone asks, because I get asked all the time about these brushes, these are super cheap synthetic brushes. Royal and Langnickel Zen series. I paid about $1 each for them. I think they were on sale like that. So they're nothing amazing. Just they're decent brushes and they're super cheap, and so that's why I use them a lot for stuff that doesn't require nice pointed water retaining holding bristles and stuff, which is what I use my Kolinsky sables for instead. So I've got the two ends of things. I've got super cheap and super expensive brushes, but these are sort of my go-to utility brush these days. Everyone always gets dazzled by the silvery look of the handle. Which is, it's just plastic, but I guess they look impressive. Alright, so all I'm doing is I'm doing a little bit of dry brush tickling the edges of what looks to be my tree top foliage areas, and giving it a little bit more definition so that it's not so completely misty looking, and giving it something to anchor the viewer's eyes to. And I'm using mostly dark mixtures of the color tones that I have in the painting already. So I'm using purples and some of the greens, and just to darken things up, moving into some of the more neutral toned browns as well. as with everything else that I've done so far, I am not just creating these in a void. I'm more following what is already there on my page and just emphasizing and pulling out the patterns and shapes that I see. Enhancing things. Also darkening up some of these areas to craft more the bulk of the foliage and shape it so that it's all not uniformly dark, but I get more of a sense of volume in areas. Oh, I did mention earlier that I would like to do a little bit with the gold mica paint to show you what happens when I dry brush that across textured paper, textury areas. This would be a good spot for that.